When people think of the Frieza arc, they think of the Super Saiyan transformation. They think of the climactic battle between good versus evil and the chaotic search for the Namekian Dragon Balls. But man, for me, that only begins to scratch the surface. And what's more, as a kid, it marked the very first time I was so moved by a particular story that I simply had to figure out why it made me feel that way. 20 years later, I'm happy to say that these are my findings. Last week we covered the Saiyan invasion on Earth, but this week we're plunging ourselves headfirst into the deep, dark reaches of the starry night sky, unwittingly en route to a certain lion's den, the likes of which none of us could have been ready for. Not Gohan, not Krillin, not Vegeta, not even Son Goku. So sit back and get comfortable, everyone, because this is how Akira Toriyama changed the Dragon Ball world forever and established one of the most iconic moments in all anime history. This I am of course talking about is the terrifying, the captivating, and the endlessly entertaining culmination to one of the central plot threads introduced in Dragon Ball Z. This, my friends, is the iconic Freeza Saga.
Moshimo, 本当にもしもだけど、そのナメック星ってところに行くことができたら、ドラゴンボールが手に入るかもしれない。
In the Saiyan Saga video we just covered, I explored the prevailing message of the arc being that the differences we are criticized and demonized for, if we try hard enough, become the strengths that define and ultimately save us. The mission statement of this arc expressed loud and clear that all of what Goku represented was a virtue against the evil which Vegeta represented. And in the end, Goku's good triumphed over Vegeta's evil. At least that was until a certain amount of poison slipped through the cracks of Goku's apparent virtuous facade, when he, quite selfishly, requested Krillin to spare Vegeta's life simply because it would have been a waste to erase such rare fighting potential, that someday he wished to fight him again. With that somewhat contrasting footnote coloring what was otherwise a rather uplifting and gleeful ending to say the least, we once again return to melancholy as we prepare to embark on the most ambitious journey this story has ever attempted. For the very first time, leaving the safe and comfortable confines of the Earth's surface and venturing forth onto the stars above to explore answers to a problem established in that very last arc. How can they get more Dragon Balls to rescue their friends that gave up their lives for the Earth against the Saiyans? Once again, putting to the test those very differences the prior arc celebrated, the Frieza arc takes to its natural extreme, asking the question, what happens when you encounter a foe, the likes of which your friends can help you best, who threatens your very family? Someone that forces you into a corner to fight, not with what you've learned, but instead forces you to lash out with instinct, necessitating you to contend with what you are instead of who you are. The Freeza Saga of this story is a fascinating deconstruction of the bedrock philosophy established in the prior, testing it and pushing it past its limits to reveal something honestly exceptional. But to get there, we have to start at the beginning. Act 1. Okay, so right off the bat, one important aspect of Dragon Ball Z's structure is abundantly clear. Something that made this story incredibly difficult to put down for me when reading, and something I feel isn't taken advantage of nearly enough in the modern material. And that is blending your arcs together, feeding into each other, to establish and to set up story beats for what's to come. What do I mean? Well, as we touched on last week, the likes of Yamcha, Chaozu, Tenshinhan, and Piccolo all bit the dust thanks to the Saiyans, and due to Piccolo's death, the Earthlings not only now can't wish back the likes of Chaozu, but they can't wish back anyone ever again, it seems. However, in passing, in the middle of a conversation Nappa and Vegeta shared, Toriyama dangled a potential solution right before our eyes. Naturally, we aren't too worried about that while we're covering that material because everyone is dying and we're waiting for Goku to get back to Earth to make the save. But thanks to that small piece of exposition, that small amount of time set aside to explain that very small piece of information, we now have a natural cause and effect between the last arc and this new one. Due to the events and information disclosed, we now have a motivation and goal to strive for. In other words, because the Saiyan Saga happened, therefore the Freeza Saga must happen. And Dragon Ball Super, it really struggled with this, with each arc feeling as though they were independent islands of story largely disconnected from one another. When the Universe 6 tournament ended. It had a conclusion, and then suddenly we get a cold open into the future Trunks material that wasn't informed by the prior events in the slightest. Now, this does happen once in Dragon Ball Z, but it happens for a specific reason to mark the ending of a particular era. Sort of, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself with that. No spoilers for Boo, you gotta wait for that one. But anyways, yes, the fallout following the Saiyan Saga is a large component to what ultimately defines the setup for this one. Every fighter involved is hospitalized or in critical health, and funnily enough, they all have their eyes set on the same goal, to gather the Namekian Dragon Balls. And while Vegeta's path to that goal seems rather straightforward, that isn't the case for the Earthlings, who are tied down by their current technologies. Or at least that's what we're led to believe. Due to that beneficial cause and effect I spoke of earlier, the legwork of the prior arc makes the journey to Namek possible for the Earthlings in a very believable way. For if Piccolo is a Namekian, so too must Kami be. And if Kami is a Namekian, he must have come to Earth somehow. And so enter Mr. Popo with the single fastest form of transportation on Earth in all of Dragon Ball. I'm serious about that, by the way. This magic carpet thing he has puts the instant transmission to shame on planet Earth. Dude can teleport in an instant without even a key signature to lock onto. But something I didn't notice until this reread was how both the Saiyan arc as well as this one begins with stories of an alien origin. Both Goku and Kami, children sent from their respective homeworlds to wait for rescue on an alien planet, with both infants suffering memory loss in the process. And to be honest, when I first read this, I found the amnesia angle to be quite convoluted and frankly, a little convenient considering we already just moments prior accepted that was Goku's fate also. And while it is a little trite for it to follow a similar path in that regard, let's see if there's something more at play here thematically to acknowledge before casting harsh judgment. Structurally or narratively, this plot point exists to grant Bulma, Krillin, and Gohan the means with which to travel to Namek in order to make their wish on the Namekian Dragon Balls before Vegeta does. Because of this, there's a pressing time constraint, and thus they couldn't wait for Goku, who eventually travels using his own pod's tech. An otherwise creative choice that's difficult to critique in comparison. However, with Goku and Kami sharing a similar origin in many respects, there's something more there thematically perhaps to appreciate. Divulged initially through Mr. Popo and later on Namek itself, we hear a tale of a mysterious event on that planet called the Cataclysm, an event that almost wiped out the Namekian race entirely, not too dissimilar to Goku's fated homeworld, planet Vegeta. However, unlike Goku, who arrived with the mission of destroying humanity itself, ultimately, thanks to the kindness of one individual, he survived a terrible fall and became a sweet and loving child. Conversely, the son of Katats, Kami, thanks to the harshness of his time spent waiting endlessly on Earth and the evils of humanity itself, was forced to purge himself of this learned darkness, resulting in King Piccolo, of whom we're all familiar with, the Earth's greatest threat. Two similar paths, both resulting in polar opposite outcomes for Goku and Kami. The Cataclysm is described as a sudden but significant change in the climate that took Namek to the brink, leaving only one Namekian behind, perhaps a thematic forewarning of a similarly powerful force of nature, a certain emperor of the universe that threatens their very existence of both the recovering planet Namek and its people. And speaking of, unlike Vegeta and Raditz, whom we see at the very end of the first act, no such treatment is given to Freeza. His name is treated with far more reverence, or fear perhaps. Upon Vegeta's return to receive medical treatment, while the condition he's seen in is viewed as surprising and the Saiyan Prince is given respect from those beneath him, Freeza, despite not even being present, is still a name that appears from the mouths of almost everyone in the facility on a number of occasions. Each individual, even Vegeta, seems to grant this name, this ruler, the attention and respect he commands. As far as preludes to an introduction goes, this is surprisingly effective. particularly because it's paired with Vegeta's motivation for the arc and his role being established. He is neither the main threat nor the side of good, instead acting as an enemy, yes, but also the enemy of our enemy, as he operates somewhere in the middle between the two poles of this story, the Earthlings and Freeza. And finally, one last tidbit before we move on to the main meat of this arc. I mentioned in my review of the Saiyan Saga that Vegeta, in his mind, represented the perfect Saiyan, genetically superior to Goku in every way regardless of his allegiances and hard work. He was the self-professed strongest in the universe. And if one thinks they're the strongest in the universe, there's never a need to learn anything from anyone because, well, they're inferior. However, the first act to this arc demonstrates that Vegeta, following his retreat on Earth, has learned something, has taken away a piece of knowledge. When offered his scouter before departing for Namek, Vegeta declines. It's a very small moment restricted to one panel alone, but in it you could already see the wheels put in motion for the journey Vegeta is about to embark upon.
Scouter で俺の戦闘力数値をよく見てみやがれ!
In the previous arc, I praised the story for its wonderful use and introduction of the B-plot. No longer was Goku the sole focus for the story's second act. Instead, the limelight was shared with Gohan and Piccolo as they too prepared for the Saiyans. And it seems as though Toriyama either received praise for this choice or simply enjoyed it tremendously because, where the Saiyan Saga leveraged the benefits of 2 separate plot threads, the Namek Saga doubled it to 4 plot threads, and in the process created the single most compelling and, in my opinion, complex stretch of Dragon Ball's story, both to date and arguably ever. The Scramble for the Namekian Dragon Balls is a detailed web of various groups and stressors, all with different conflicting ideologies, goals, and methods coming into dramatic conflict with one another. And outside of a couple missteps, I think it's an incredibly exciting success in terms of writing for Akira Toriyama, particularly when you consider he hadn't really tried anything like this before in the same way. The Namek material is notorious for being both exciting and dense in terms of narrative for people to cover. You've got everything from the Earthlings' peaceful arrival to their discovery of a great evil they must avoid at all costs. Meanwhile, we've got Vegeta making his sophomore outing with the series, this time as the proverbial thorn in the side of pretty much everyone who isn't Vegeta. And finally, we have the single most intimidating entity ever to be introduced in this now wide, expansive story. The Emperor of the Universe, Freeza. On his quest to wish for immortality, the one thing his seemingly unlimited power hasn't been able to grant him yet. The reason why I highlight the story as these groups to analyze is because I'd like to emphasize the enormous gap in difficulty between training arcs occurring in parallel during the lead up to the Saiyan invasion and this chaotic, exciting mishmash of powers, strategies, personalities, and fighting that makes up this section of the material. It's like advancing from B-plots for dummies to the Song of Ice and Fire novels seamlessly. And due to this added complexity, in order for me to effectively break it down, I've had to reconstruct how I present this material to prevent it from being a simple step-by-step breakdown of each event. That's boring, and I want to do better than that, so instead I've decided to break down this impressive section as follows. There are 3 main groups in this section: the Earthlings, Freeza, and finally Vegeta. Each group I'll touch on in this section is represented by a particular ideology, and keeping that in mind is honestly the secret sauce that makes this section of the story tick. Examining the differences in how Team Earth, Team Freeza, and Team Vegeta carry themselves is key to not only understanding how these dynamics work and pay off, but moreover, how this ended up creating some of the best and most exciting sequences in this series. And it all starts with the Earthlings' arrival. Each group is set apart by something fundamental to them, whether that be fear, greed, or altruism in the case of Team Earth, composed of Gohan, Bulma, and Krillin as they blindly step forth into the stars and onto a brand new alien world, Namek. Not for themselves, not for their greed, but explicitly for others. And surprisingly, no other character exemplifies this trait of altruism more than Son Gohan. And to tell you the truth, it's quite meaningful, all things considered, when you take a closer look. As he sat there banged up in the hospital following the Saiyan invasion while being coddled by his loving mother, Gohan demonstrates how he's grown as a person tremendously there and then. Gone are the days of the once meek and terrified of his own shadow little kid, and now stands a young man with a considerable sense of responsibility for those he loves and respects. Straight up disobeying his mother's explicit orders to not get involved in this rescue, going on to deliver a surprisingly heroic speech, the likes of which you'd never see Goku deliver outside of a dub rewrite. Talking about the responsibility he feels to do the right thing by those that gave up their own lives for the Earth. How he has the power to do something and therefore should, it being the only way he can bring Piccolo back. And when he says all of this, it's difficult not to hear the final parting words Gohan shared with Piccolo echo in the background. This is all to say that the leading inspiration for the Earthlings is their conscience, their desire to do the right thing despite being faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. Okay, so not good. And this is about as good a time as any to illustrate that tenacity and a kind heart isn't going to cut it if they are going to survive on the single most dangerous planet filled with the universe's most savage killers for long. And so this is a perfect spot to point out their unique approach when it comes to navigating this world. They're entirely passive if they can help it. And that approach honestly turned this rescue of Dende into one of the best scenes for me in the first half of this arc. Something that often gets overshadowed, and in my case, for the first few times I read this, totally missed, was the path that Gohan and Krillin took in order to get to this village and witness what happens with Frieza and his goons. Because that path tells us a lot about them as characters. As shown earlier, Gohan and Krillin ultimately want to get in, make their wish, and get out without being noticed. They have no desire for conflict, and so now the question for Toriyama is, how can I get these guys into conflict? Well, it's explicitly told to us that Frieza, his men, and Vegeta are seeking out the Dragon Balls based on the villagers that they are sensing, using the inhabitants as beacons for the Dragon Balls before slaughtering them and stealing what they came for. That's what we as audience members understand and know. However, due to their nature, as Frieza and his goons fly overhead without so much as a Dragon Radar in hand, it doesn't even occur to Gohan and Krillin that Frieza and his men are targeting these villages this way, resulting in, once they arrive on the scene to see how they are going about business, Gohan's true nature and shock is exposed. And in the process, exposes them to the dangers of Frieza and, more importantly, Dodoria right now. It's a small choice, but honestly, a massively effective one. That said, I'd be remiss if I didn't draw attention to issues I had with this story too. An aspect of this tale that serves a clear and frankly obvious narrative purpose, but comes at the cost of my own immersion in this story, is one that forced me to audibly say, "Oh, really?" while I was reading, because I honestly didn't remember this happening. So here's the current situation. Akira Toriyama needs to give the Earthlings more of an edge in this tale, because, let's be honest, they're all outgunned, outnumbered, and behind in the search for the Dragon Balls, and are working with an impossible disadvantage. Their tactics and kindness might have landed them the benefit of Dende, their inside man that can give them suggestions and information, but outside of that, they're very much behind in every single sense of the word. So, to remedy this, Toriyama decided to allow the Earthlings to get the drop on Vegeta first without him noticing, meaning they know he's there but he doesn't know that they're on Namek. This favors their approach of sneaking around and puts Vegeta in one aspect at a disadvantage. However, in order to achieve that advantage, this happens.
What the hell? Oh my God, no way.
I have to ask, what are the odds of a giant fish jumping out of the water like that in that exact moment? Considering it never happened again in the series, up until then everything about this scene made sense. Gohan and Krillin could hide their key and Dende couldn't, and thus Vegeta was lured in to investigate. It all made sense. However, thanks to Moby Dickhead over here, Vegeta moves along as if there's nothing to see here. This scene is entertainingly tense and offers a lot to leverage in the future for the Earthlings, but I can't help but feel how contrived a creative choice that this ultimately was. I mean, if this never happened, Vegeta wouldn't have hid his Dragon Ball or taken as many chances, which led to Gohan and co stealing some of his. Unlike Gohan's tail returning in the prior episode in the nick of time towards the end of the story, this one acts as an anchoring point that future key plot elements need to rely on. Now don't get me wrong, I'm thrilled with all that occurs later in the story, I just don't like this one scene. It sort of sours what comes later ever so slightly, and unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. Chapters later, Dende brings Krillin to Guru's place in order to gain precious intel, retrieve his Dragon Ball, and to unlock his true power. Now, let's look at this closely. There's plenty to love about this choice thematically. It's been explained already that the Namekian Dragon Balls upon request are given to heroes with good hearts, that they must pass challenges, etc. And thus it makes sense that given the circumstances, Guru would give Krillin the Dragon Ball. It's a wonderful, peaceful contrast to how Frieza and Vegeta have gathered theirs, putting greater emphasis on Krillin's good intentions, all the while helping to level the playing field slightly. And while still lopsided, it is now starting to turn in the right direction for the Earthlings. It's wonderful, and it all takes place because they made the virtuous choice in saving Dende by risking their own lives. However, and you knew that however was coming, Guru possessing the power to boost the Earthlings' strength, or should I say, release their hidden power, feels contrived. I said the same thing in my review for the King Piccolo arc concerning Korin Tower and the magical water Goku drank that made him stronger, and I've just never been a fan of unearned power-ups. Although this type of thing has now been established in this world, and therefore at least having some semblance of setup, I just don't think two wrongs make a right, unfortunately. You could argue in this instance the Earthlings have earned this power-up by doing the right thing time and again, and I suppose that does make this pill easier to swallow, but it still feels kind of cheap. Like Akira Toriyama saw the widening gap between the Earthlings and literally everyone else on this proverbial chessboard, and decided to give them an extra queen because he felt sorry for them, or perhaps more accurately, because they'd stand no chance against anything else on the horizon if he didn't. Particularly given how insane things are going to get with regards power creep later on. However, before that happens, the fact the Earthlings got the drop on Vegeta early is about to pay off in another one of these very intense exchanges. Akira Toriyama's ultimate plan for Son Gohan is constantly making its presence felt all throughout this arc. Using the radar, Gohan locates Vegeta's hidden Dragon Ball at the bottom of a lake, and even comparing his demeanor to the beginning of the last arc demonstrates a colossal change in his character. So much more confident, much less childish, so much more responsibility on the surface. And moreover, he doesn't shrink in the heat of the moment either. Confronted by Vegeta, who couldn't have been more scary to him in the arc prior, he stands his ground, puts on his best poker face, and successfully absorbs a strike from him, even going on to smile afterwards because he knows that he won the war. As long as they have one Dragon Ball, they're all in a stalemate, no matter how strong the other side might be. Team Frieza. Frieza's introduction to the story is additionally our first introduction to their squad, and therefore the second party I'm examining today. Sharing many similarities to the chilling opening sequence of Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, this introduction alongside another creepy customer I'll be touching on next week holds for me the title of best introduction in the series. And if I'm being honest, I think this one might just edge it out. Frieza demonstrates his control not just of many Dragon Balls or his powerful henchmen, but also the lives of the poor defenseless Namekian elders and children that even suggest that they might stand in his way of what he wants. Sitting comfortably atop his floating throne, hardly lifting so much as a single finger, he relishes in taking the path that will cause the most emotional damage to his opponent, no matter what it seems. Exemplified perhaps no better than this scene where the village elder tells the small children behind him to run away while he holds Frieza off. These were the events that caused Gohan's outburst, caused him to blow their cover, and led to Dodoria's pursuit in the first place. But moreover, this is our introduction to Frieza and his team, and regrettably, this is the team's approach. After having explored the Earthlings' tactics, it seems in many respects the exact opposite approach is taken by Team Frieza. Not passive in the slightest and operating in broad daylight, this monster fears no one, demanding he gets what he wants directly, without so much as the need to lift a single finger if he doesn't want to. All the while the Earthlings try to keep low profiles, stealing and sneaking small victories here and there where they can, Frieza and his team literally bulldoze their way through Namek using their superior tech and powers. However, as exposited in the prior arc, This superior tech, combined with their philosophy of might makes right, leads them to have a very clear and obvious weakness. One that the Earthlings could use to their advantage, and one the Namekians are about to exploit. Naturally, we don't spend as much time with the likes of Freeza and his team as we do with the Earthlings and Vegeta. However, I'd argue that this is part of what makes them feel so in control and formidable. Throughout this entire sequence, despite Dodoria's suspicious absence and eventually Zarbon's too, Freeza never loses sight of his ultimate goal: to gather the Namekian Dragon Balls. Even after registering the presence of other forces on the planet in the shape of Vegeta and even the Earthlings themselves, he's only ever really thrown when his ultimate goal is compromised or encounters speed bumps. The loss of Zarbon and Dodoria almost feels secondary to the reaction he offers after losing the Scouters. You can see the quiet rage, like someone just got the upper hand at him that he didn't expect. And get the upper hand they did. Without these, he'll struggle to locate more Dragon Balls. Throughout this opening sequence, he loses Dodoria, he loses Kiwi, he loses Vegeta technically, he loses Zarbon and many others. He loses them all, and he just ships in more with new and improved Scouters. They're just meat shields to him. The limits of his inhumanity and cruelty seemingly show no signs of limitation. And the most unsettling part is, he hasn't come in direct conflict with anyone of consequence in the story yet. But we still feel his ever-looming presence over the story like a specter. He feels unstoppable in one-on-one confrontation. The Earthlings know it, and most importantly, our third team, or should I say, Saiyan Prince, knows it too. Team Vegeta. In many ways, Vegeta is the single most important character in this section of the story. While the likes of Freeza and the Earthlings share very little in terms of approach, thus making their coming into contact rather rare and tricky to bring about, Vegeta is very much the gel that holds and connects these teams together. Looking at this through a narrative theory lens, Vegeta is a perfect hybrid of the two teams we just spoke about. While he will leverage savagery, intimidation, and force when necessary like Freeza, he knows that presently he is best served by picking and choosing his moments carefully so as not to overextend himself. It's here we get to enjoy the strategic and intelligent Vegeta from the Saiyan Saga, one where we finally begin to stop looking at him as just an adversary but more closely as someone to follow along with. We understand he's despicable, reprehensible, and bad to the bone, made evident by his treatment of a certain Namekian village. But it's in these moments we can see his utility to the Earthlings and even start to appreciate his tenacity, cunning, and strategy when applied against the likes of Freeza and his men that represent the truest sense of evil in this galaxy. I've touched on this in the past, however, while the Earthlings are the side that we find ourselves cheering for, we can't help but get caught up in the cavalcade of mischief and terror Vegeta exacts on the world around him, and I often wondered why I found it so exciting. And the answer I stumbled across was, well, in storytelling there are two modes characters can often find themselves operating with, and largely these dictate how interesting they ultimately are within a story. These two modes or settings a character can be set to are active and reactionary. When we look at the Earthlings, they are largely a reactionary force as of right now, trying to move undetected and passively achieve their goals by reacting to the movements of other more powerful fighters on planet Namek. However, they aren't exclusively this way, and it's in those short bursts of active participation where they make their own choices that dictate the story that we find the most exciting as viewers. Vegeta is the exact opposite of the Earthlings in this respect. Vegeta is probably the most active character in the story and in many ways makes this story happen. Where Freeza demonstrates the pinnacle of the hierarchy, Vegeta simply laughs and using his power, intimidation, and intelligence bends the world around him to his will. Sure, he'll exhibit bursts of reactionary tendencies by targeting isolated goons like Dodoria, Kiwi, and Zarbon, but he'll also leverage apparently terrible circumstances and transform them into some of the most exciting double crosses that will have you at the edge of your seat actually cheering him on because you're so impressed by what he's managed to achieve with effectively nothing but good timing, some power, and a few staunch bluffs. Acting as the sole force in the story that forces the Earthlings to act as well as Team Freeza to lash out.
Vegeta.
At this point, everything seems to be going Vegeta's way. He's stolen all of the Dragon Balls in Frieza's possession in the heist of the century. He's stolen the Dragon Ball Krillin received from Guru because he was being careless with his own power boost. Furthermore, Vegeta himself has had numerous additional Zenkai boosts, making him one of the strongest beings on the planet itself. And in addition to all of that, he now has 7 Dragon Balls in his possession. He even got to beat up Kakarot's little kid who was just randomly chilling out on his own. Everything's great. All he has to do now is grab the first ball that he hid away under a lake after he slaughtered that village. Should be around here somewhere. Could have sworn... Wait. Honestly, without Vegeta, this first section of the arc wouldn't be nearly as amazing as it otherwise is. And what makes it even better, following the explosion of anger towards the Earthlings getting the drop on him, he's forced to swallow his pride and join forces as a certain flamboyant fighting force ordered to the planet by Frieza for backup arrives. And what's more is, the arrival of this fighting force changes the entire dynamic of this arc. No longer are we dealing with scattered teams and chaotic plot threads. Now we are contending with unlikely alliances, fighting for survival against beings that are some of the most cruel in the galaxy. Gohan and Krillin versus Guldo. I've praised Akira Toriyama's paneling ad nauseum over the years, and I certainly will continue to do so. Shut up. But I think if there was ever a moment his creativity was held back by his layouts, it was in this fight with Guldo. The artwork and paneling is still crisp as ever, as you would expect from this era of the story, but while he's dealing with static images as a foundation to his work, I don't think conveying Guldo's power of stopping time was particularly effective visually here. Which is why I think he felt the urge for Guldo to consistently monologue about what he's doing and what he's thinking moment to moment. It feels very unnatural and unlike any other dialogue in the story. And interestingly, or perhaps fittingly, the best part of this fight isn't the fighting itself, but the pre-fight hype up from Vegeta to Krillin and Gohan, along with his assist at the end. It honestly makes you relieved he's on your side rather than against you this time. It's a wonderful feeling. Furthermore, you can see his trademark strategic approach permeate every piece of dialogue and action he offers. Throwing the Dragon Ball away, ordering Krillin to break it, taking stock of his team, and when Goku is expected to arrive. You can tell he's constantly thinking of ways to tip the scales in his favor. He feels like a real, living and breathing character, even criticizing Gohan and Krillin's choice in approach mid-battle. And to be quite honest, without Vegeta, the Ginyu Force themselves wouldn't be nearly as intimidating. All of their intensity and characterization that's worth anything comes from Vegeta's dialogue concerning them and how they force Vegeta out of his active role and into a reactionary one. Oh my god, I love Vegeta. Vegeta versus Raccoon. I don't know what there's to say about this fight that already hasn't been said to death. The choreography is stunning, the build-up is sublime, the circumstances are fittingly dire, and Vegeta is ruthless. We even get a preview of the technique that will eventually become the final flash in this fight. Something else I do enjoy about this though that isn't brought up enough, I think, is that while Vegeta is amazingly helpful in the Guldo fight, both before and after, even in the heat of this battle against Raccoon, at no point does he ever expect to receive assistance from anyone. He scratches, he claws, and cheap shots where he can, and when he exhausts himself, staring down Recoom's final attack, he says to himself, in his mind, that he's going to die. The Earthlings go on to save Vegeta, but the means with which they did made me reflect on Vegeta's method of making the save prior on them. He quite literally didn't try to save them, he tried to kill Guldo. Saving them was incidental. Gohan and Krillin had to dodge on their own once they were free. When Gohan saves Vegeta, the Saiyan Prince reprimands him for not making the strategic play instead of the sentimental one. But it's not all bad news, it seems, at least not yet. While Frieza has all of the Dragon Balls, he is unable to use them specifically because of who he is and what he stands for. As the story explained earlier, the Namekian Dragon Balls are normally given to heroes with righteous hearts after passing a series of compelling challenges. The very nature of this challenge seems in line with something classic Dragon Ball would explore. However, Frieza's presence saw fit to shortchange that possible adventure in the name of a much darker and serious tale. Thankfully, however, the Namekians had a fail-safe precaution built into the Dragon Balls themselves, one the likes of Frieza and the approach he has taken would never in a million years receive. A password, one that Frieza does not have specifically because of his brutal approach. And while things seem to be going from bad to worse on the battlefield against Recoom, with Vegeta, Krillin, and now Gohan taking either serious injury or being taken out completely, at the very last possible moment, he arrives. Goku arrives. A character I've not spoken of enough in this video is Goku, surprising as that might be. But Goku really isn't the focus of the story that he used to be. And that's mostly because the way Dragon Ball's story is told from this point on is honestly very different to the arcs that preceded it. Where he once shared a lot of the spotlight with other characters in the Saiyan arc, this Namek material has him omitted almost entirely while he travels to Namek following his friends. We really only see him through brief cutaways that serve to remind us on occasion that he does in fact still exist and is getting stronger. Quite a bit stronger. But don't worry, that lack of screen time, that inactivity, that changes here, briefly. But after that, he's back, right? Kinda. That's next week's problem. What's happening with Goku on Namek? Well, tell you the truth, it's kind of awesome. I remember watching this moment unfold as a kid. Goku arrives right after Gohan sustains a devastating injury through Recoom breaking the little kid's neck. It's honestly one of the most unsettling sights in the anime when it happens, but that unsettling feeling is contrasted beautifully with Goku's emphatic return to the spotlight. But as I alluded to moments ago, unlike his timely return to the battlefield on Earth during the Saiyan Saga, this occasion feels distinctly different and, well, almost unique when compared to both the last arc and the greater series. This might be the most seismic change in Dragon Ball's storytelling approach since the conclusion of the very first arc and its eventual pivot to the Kung Fu tournament style that lasted all the way up until the end of the Saiyan Saga. And with the Namek Saga, but more specifically the arrival of Goku on Namek, it's clear we've entered a brand new era of the show, one that brandishes a specific change, and that change is pushing past your limits. Instead of chronicling the virtues of martial arts training in a Kung Fu series, we are concerning ourselves more now with the scope of the battles themselves, the characters involved and how they continuously push past their respective limits during said battles. And to be clear, I'm not saying that one is superior than the other, but instead pointing out the shift that's taking place instead. I spoke briefly earlier on the topic of Krillin and Gohan receiving sudden power boosts instead of going through a training arc to remain competitive in the mix of combat, but that's just the tip of the iceberg here. Where the previous arc placed all of its emphasis on self-improvement through technique and camaraderie that was ultimately explored in the final battle thematically, this arc flips that concept on its head, focusing instead on overcoming one's physical limits through sheer will and determination alone. Whether that be via Goku subjecting himself to brutal gravity training on the way to Namek, Gohan and Krillin allying themselves with the Namekians in order to get stronger, or Vegeta just by simply being too angry to die, partnered up with his new best friend, the Zenkai boost. The mountain that is being climbed metaphorically over the course of this arc is certainly a different one than which was explored during the Saiyan material, and following the climax of that arc in many respects, part of me is pleased they pivoted in this direction for Freeza, mostly because I genuinely can't imagine a better way to conclude that particular era of Dragon Ball than the final story told between the Prince from the Stars and the Outcast from Earth. And while part of me does lament the change of atmosphere, even I have to admit the clear benefits narratively to this change in creative direction. Namely, the myth of the legendary Super Saiyan. I've been carefully measuring my approach when breaking down the Scramble for the Dragon Balls here, and it's for a reason, choosing to highlight the interactions and convergences between three teams with contrasting dynamics: the passive Earthlings, the cunning Vegeta, and the assertive and domineering, immovable object that is Freeza. His approach is simple: confront head on and take what you want when you want with malice. And interestingly, as Goku struts onto the battlefield, aiding his allies, taking out Raccoon, styling on Jace, and taking out Berta with ease, his approach and role in this arc too becomes crystal clear. He's not passive, and nor is he cunning. It's entirely direct. An approach that, while significantly more peaceful, makes him structurally the perfect natural counter to Freeza. Up until now, Freeza has been a force the likes of which cannot be denied. And now, as we notice through Goku's battle with the Ginyu Force, he too possesses an aura that is undeniable. One that forces the Ginyus to blurt out in fear, wondering if Goku could be the legend that they've heard of, the Super Saiyan. Both Freeza and Goku are now on a fixed path for conflict in the arc, and one you can feel the tension for right away. What happens when an unstoppable force meets the immovable object? This is awesome, but the arrival of Goku is also significant because it marks the convergence of several long-running plot threads: the Earthlings, Vegeta, Freeza, and indeed even Goku, into one wonderful cocktail of combat and misdirection. Goku's arrival very much is the midpoint of the narrative, and just like with most midpoints of stories, it shakes things up considerably, changing the status quo, while also providing a significant swerve that changes our perception of where this story is going.
私の戦闘力数は53万です。
Now this scene might seem rather inconsequential compared to everything else, serving only to keep Frieza busy trying to figure out the password to the Dragon Balls so Vegeta can steal them back later with Gohan and Krillin. And while it does all of those things, it also forced me to do maths as a kid. In this brief scene, Frieza reveals his battle power to be 530,000 before fighting Nail. And what's interesting about that becomes apparent when you look at it alongside the fight Goku's enjoying showing off against Ginyu. For when leveraging the output of a Kaioken ×2, Goku is shown to boast a power level reading of 180,000, meaning that his base is 90,000. Furthermore, if we cast our minds back to one of the few scenes we see of Goku on the ship to Namek, he said he should be capable of managing a ×10 multiplier through the Kaioken thanks to his intense training, meaning his true max around this time should sit somewhere around 900,000 without destroying himself too badly, and more than that if he really goes nuclear like he did on Earth. Therefore, this reveal from Frieza places a considerable amount of emphasis on two aspects of their future fight: Goku's capability to push past his limits and the extent to which Frieza's transformation, according to Zarbon, can offer him in terms of a power boost also. However, all things considered at this moment in time, while Frieza is monstrous, things seem to be within reach for Goku. Well, that is until the midpoint swerve I touched on earlier. When that comes into effect, things change. I think as a kid, this was a section of the story that bothered me beyond measure. It was such a cheap trick, such a cheap shot, one that put Goku into the worst position he's been in since the end of the last arc, and one that totally ruins what had been, up until that point, Goku styling on virtually everyone he came into contact with. And while there's very clearly some terrific opportunities for the likes of Krillin and especially Gohan and Vegeta to flex their characters' finest attributes when facing such demonstrably strange and troubling circumstances, it stands to reason that this scene and sequence exists for no other reason than to take Goku out of commission for the foreseeable future until he's ready to join the main offensive against Frieza later on. In terms of pacing and tension for the story, this is a fine and natural choice to make. Allow the tension to fester as the likes of Gohan and Krillin prepare for Frieza's imminent arrival following Nail's revelation to Frieza that he's likely too late. And while this might be the Funimation filler kid in me talking, after spending what felt like 2 years waiting for Goku to get out of that goddamn tank, reading through this comparatively reasonably short sequence of chapters waiting for him to get out only helped to resurface the trauma that was waiting for that stupid tank to let Goku out. Okay, but again, I think that is just the childhood anime viewer in me resurfacing, because as is the case with many things that drag on in Dragon Ball Z, it's paced much better in the manga. After sneaking away from Vegeta while he's sleeping for what must be the first time in literal days, the two Earthlings summon the Namekian dragon with the help of Dende. This is a perfect choice for these two characters to make in this moment in time. However, remember when I said that Nail started snickering at Frieza, claiming that it was likely too late for him to make his wish now because Dende must have already given the Earthlings the password? Yeah. Well, I gotta ask, why did he say that? I mean, he's lying there, limp on the ground, with his only mission being to stall for time. He knows the dragon hasn't been summoned yet. He's flat on his back, so the only thing he can see is the sky. Is the sky dark, Nail? No? Then shut the f*** up! It's a nitpick, but why tell him there and then? Why not just wait for the sky to go all dark and then say it? Oh wait, I know why. Okay, that was awesome. If there's one aspect of this story I hope is abundantly clear, it's that Akira Toriyama knows how to tie his themes to the final fights exceptionally well. With regards to the Saiyan invasion, the story of that material saw the weaker Earthlings demonstrate that natural-born strength alone isn't the only thing that matters in a fight. To communicate this, Toriyama created the characters of Vegeta and Nappa to bounce off of, two entities that epitomize this idea of might makes right, ruthless aggression and natural-born ability. All the while, the Earthlings' efforts were framed such that they relied on training, technique, and the bonds they forged across this entire journey. In other words, they were the ideological opposites to that of the Saiyans, making the final battle not simply a compelling fight between some awesome characters, but also a battle between two sides of an argument, two sides that explored that arc's themes. The Freeza Saga, as I mentioned, has changed up the formula somewhat. However, that's not to say the same structural approach isn't taken by Toriyama when we approach the final section of this story. While there's a significant change in Vegeta's approach here, allying himself alongside the likes of the Earthlings in an effort to topple the greatest evil and power this story has ever seen, the themes of camaraderie and martial arts are less of a force in this exchange. There's a compelling story being told about pushing past your limits in this arc, one that for the longest time could easily be applied to the likes of Goku, Piccolo, Gohan, Krillin, and even Vegeta, all in very different ways. Goku by continuously exposing himself to torturous gravity training, bringing him to the brink of death over and over again en route to Namek. Piccolo accepting the help of a stranger to gain the strength necessary to help Gohan. Krillin getting his hidden power released, and then we have Vegeta and Gohan. Two characters who perhaps demonstrate this theme of pushing past your limits more than any other characters in this arc so far. So much so, you'd be hard-pressed to find an argument that says that these two aren't the main characters of this Namek material prior to the final battle. While the term pushing past your limits has lost 95% of its meaning in the modern material, referring only to the effort and power you can emit from your person these days, which is kind of in line with the Saiyan Saga's bad themes, but whatever. In this arc, both Vegeta and Gohan, while pushing themselves physically in increasingly dangerous and reckless ways to achieve their respective goals, there's also another dimension to this limit-breaking theme that you might not be considering. When it comes to Vegeta's actions in this arc, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone that doesn't recall his epic clashes against the likes of Frieza's henchmen, whether it be his beatdowns of Kiwi and Dodoria, his cunning struggle against Zarban, or his catastrophic clash against Raccoon and the rest of the Ginyus. It's abundantly clear that Vegeta has pushed past his limits physically time and time again, a fact he reminds us of every other chapter when he recovers from the brink of death. But often overlooked are the compromises Vegeta makes, the harsh truths he must have had to consider, and the options he took following his defeat on planet Earth and during the events of Namek as this situation worsens. The character Vegeta was during the Saiyan Saga, the type that wouldn't see the value in learning anything from anyone, the self-professed most powerful in the universe, is no longer here during this Freeza Saga. And in many ways, this is because he's no longer allowing his pride to rule his life. He willingly learns to sense ki without the aid of a scouter, and he joins forces with the Earthlings who forced him to retreat. While he has indeed pushed past his limits physically, it should also be apparent that Vegeta too has pushed past the limits of his own pride to achieve more favorable outcomes for himself. I mentioned in my last video that Dragon Ball Z isn't simply the story of Goku in isolation anymore, but is becoming increasingly more so the rise of Son Gohan. And I think this arc emphasizes this creative change even more so. While I think the narrative of the Saiyan Saga offered Gohan a lot to work with from a character standpoint, the story itself was still very much contingent on the past actions of Goku. How the bonds he's forged and the attitude he possesses towards self-improvement served him greatly in the battle against Vegeta. However, this arc shifts that approach to one that's more internally driven character by character. One that Goku can still and will largely continue to participate in to legendary degrees as this story presses forward, but one that's also, I believe, tailor-made for the likes of Son Gohan to demonstrate the very best of his character. When you stop to ask yourself the question, what does Gohan value more than anything else? When we first see the character, that seems obvious. Like all children his age, they value security and their own self-interest. He is just a small, naive child after all. However, as we saw in the Saiyan Saga, Gohan values his allies tremendously. When faced with Piccolo's death, he lashes out at Nappa with great power. When he notices the fake moon in the sky, he's the one that insists they turn back to help his dad, not Krillin. When his mom told him to stay, he insisted to go. And when Dende was about to die all alone, Gohan proved that as long as he has a pulse, he's always willing to do what he thinks is the right thing. This small child might be naive and inexperienced, as Vegeta says, but he has an enormous amount of heart. And thanks to friends like Krillin who bring that level of experience up on his side, they are able to pick up the slack when Gohan overextends himself beyond his own capabilities, which takes a lot. While Gohan, Goku, and Vegeta are all in similar situations regarding Frieza, as has been established throughout this tale, the Saiyan blood within these characters pays off tremendously in ways unforeseen even by the likes of Frieza. Gohan is still a brave character for all the reasons I mentioned, but I'd like to illustrate just how brave Krillin is too. At every turn on the battlefields Gohan has been on, Krillin has been there to watch Gohan's back every single step of the way. When he falls, Krillin picks him up. And even here, when Frieza carelessly demonstrates a fraction of his power to show off, Krillin doesn't think about himself, but instead risks his life once again to protect Dende. And it costs him. In the manga, when Krillin is impaled by the despicable Frieza for no other reason than his own morbid amusement, while the heroic nature of Krillin saving Dende led to this outcome for the young man, it's the reactions of both Vegeta and Gohan I found particularly interesting, acting as projections for us to observe as to where their respective priorities lie. For Vegeta, it's power, shouting out in amazement of the speed Frieza was capable of, totally dispassionate towards Krillin's fated outcome. All the while Gohan screams his friend's name, reflecting the humanity that's been drained from his best friend right before his eyes. Earlier in this arc, while Vegeta had to make decisions and plays he might not be proud of, Gohan for the duration of this arc is totally and entirely outside of his comfort zone, terrified, exposed to the reprehensible actions of others, physically abused, tricked, and eventually forced to watch on as his best friend has his life drained from him. Since the introduction of Son Gohan as a character in the prior arc, while other characters have been able to push themselves physically to achieve their desired outcomes, able to leverage their strengths and lean upon the heroics that saved them time and again in the past, this story for Gohan has not been about how heroic he is, but instead his journey to find the hero that lies within him. When it comes to pushing past his limits, while it's clear to see he's done so time and again on a physical level, it's the emotional maturity of this character as he's forced to push past the limitations of his mental state that too provides for me some of the most compelling set pieces in this arc as a whole. Without hesitation, flying to the rescue of Krillin, Frieza appears before the young child with a simple, taunting statement. Why don't you worry about your own life? Say what you want about what this character manages to pull off later in the arc or what he's done before, but no other scene in this arc or the prior one reflects Gohan as a character better than this one snapshot in time. Facing down the literal devil of the universe, someone he knows he has absolutely no chance against, someone who terrifies him beyond measure. He doesn't even acknowledge what he says. He probably doesn't even hear it. All he's able to register is someone or something in his way, and the fading light of Krillin extinguishing before his very eyes, before exclaiming "move" at the top of his lungs and unloading everything he's got on Frieza there and then. A child of no more than 5 years of age, with virtually no training, was able to level the first significant attack onto Frieza we've seen in the entire series. In his second form, no less. It's one of my favorite scenes from this anime, one that demonstrates exactly the sort of character Gohan is, and once again alludes us to where this story is ultimately going. A path that will brutalize him, torture him both physically and mentally, test his limits in every sense of the word, as he's forced to stand feigning fearlessly against the likes of Frieza. Scrambling, screaming to get back to his feet only to be beaten down time and again. For the little 5-year-old kid, no matter his talents, no matter his potential, no matter his seemingly endless reserves of courage, the misery this monster is dishing out is unmistakably going to be the last thing he will ever see. Treat people with kindness and they will be kind to you. Train with people and they will stand by you. Risk your life for another without hesitation, and they too, if you're lucky, will do the same for you. And perfectly poetically, this isn't simply Gohan saving Krillin paying off here, but instead the compound interest of two separate instances Gohan has risked his life for another. For in addition to Krillin's rescue I just mentioned a moment ago, it was his initial rescue of Dende towards this arc's beginning that not only made it possible for the Dragon Balls to wish Piccolo back to life and onto Namek, but in addition to all of that, made it possible for Krillin to get up in the first place. For Dende has the hidden ability, revealed by Guru, to heal others on the battlefield. And man, the look Gohan levels against Frieza once he's healed is next level. After reading that scene, I had to look it up, and man, it gives me chills to my spine every single time. And as it happens, this didn't inspire just me, but the cunning and always strategizing Saiyan Prince, who suddenly feels that little bit more at ease moments before. If there's one aspect to this section of the Frieza fight Toriyama does well, it's manage our expectations and create hopeful moments of believable joy. Given that Goku hasn't been a massive or even medium-sized part of this arc thus far, showing up momentarily only to be benched once again in that tank, At this point, you'd believe that this was a story following the likes of Vegeta and Gohan. And with Piccolo now, after having arrived in the land of his ancestors for the very first time in his life, it should go without saying that our attention here isn't lazily applied to these battles thinking that they're simply stalling for Goku. But instead, we're in a believable sequence where genuine victory seems to always be inches from our grasp. And at no point has this been more true than at this very moment, with a reinvigorated Vegeta, a Zenkai boosted Gohan, and the arrival of one mighty warrior carrying with him the hope and courage of an entire race on the brink of extinction. And the fight that ensues once again gives us hope for victory being right on the horizon. A fact even Vegeta seems to be astounded by. Freeza is monstrous, but for the most part throughout this material thus far, we've only seen him sit in a chair and command his minions to do his dirty work, with him only recently deciding to flex his own power and exercise his own will onto those around him. And it's for that very reason we've not yet seen something integral to the character of Freeza. We've not yet seen what he represents in the story entirely yet, and that is complete and utter hopelessness. For despite this battle playing host to many moments where our heroes and unlikely allies have become more physically monstrous than at any other time before, demonstrating their own enormous amounts of courage and heart, and after having broken their own limits time and again, in this very instance it's revealed what Freeza truly is: a vicious and sadistic creature without limits. And what's more is, even the hero we await the triumphant return of, Goku, even he thinks he might not be able to win here, even if he's healed completely. This is what Freeza is: abject misery, pessimism, and helplessness. A famine, a plague on any world he finds in his crosshairs. He is the Emperor and the most powerful entity in this universe, and whatever he wants, his limitless strength wills it so. The mighty Namekian warrior with the fate of his people on his shoulders cannot topple this monster. The Zenkai boosted Gohan, despite once again demonstrating tremendous promise, has no chance of success. But where brawn and heart has failed us, Toriyama looks to the strategic genius of Vegeta, our final pool of hope from which to draw from, one whose hands are stained red in the blood of the innocent. We are forced to place all our chips on his final gambit. But even we at home feel like this is the right thing to do. Vegeta always taking stock of his options and resources, deciding to leverage his Saiyan genetics at the final hour before Freeza reveals to all of us his final form. Every time I watch this take place, I cannot help but think back to the moment where Vegeta saves Gohan and Krillin from Guldo, and how when Gohan returned that same gesture, Vegeta scolded him, berated him, insulted his experience or lack thereof. For Vegeta never made a decision based on sentiment before. He never intended to save Gohan and Krillin necessarily, insofar as he saw value in them as useful idiots to help him regain control of a particular situation, seizing the chance to kill Guldo and leaving Gohan and Krillin to save themselves if they could. Vegeta makes a variety of strategic plays in this arc, famously some of the most ingenious in the entire series. However, at this moment, when crafting what he believed to be a foolproof plan, one that took careful precaution in the most unstable of situations, just like in his battle against Recoome, where Gohan saved him, Vegeta never saw the value in taking into account the sentimentality and feelings of others. And this time, it cost him. Had it not been for the insistence of Piccolo and the others, Vegeta would have died in the dust there and then, never to be remembered for anything other than his own desperation and abject cruelty. But as fate would have it, as the dust falls around a fully realized Emperor of the universe, it seems these terrible circumstances have given rise to a brand new Super Saiyan.
Bout.
Now that Frieza has assumed his final form and Dende has been removed from the battlefield, thus creating a very real sense of high-stakes drama, Toriyama, both through Vegeta's conviction and Frieza's haunting demeanor, communicates to us that something big is about to go down. That we are in fact approaching the climax. And interestingly, this is a battle I initially missed the obvious parallels in. Much like the battle on Earth against Nappa, these same fighters once again find themselves staring down the barrel of a horrifying opponent in the absence of Goku. But this time, it's different. Gohan leads the charge here, no longer the meek and defenseless child. This newly hardened prodigy, furious over the heartless murder of Dende, leads this trio's attack against Frieza. And while this battle, of course, does not amount to a victory, it represents an advancement in Gohan's character and sets up a fascinating callback to the previous arc. With Frieza's death being now headed straight for him, it's impossible not to see echoes of what led to Piccolo's sacrifice. But in spite of Piccolo's presence, he doesn't make the save. Nor is Krillin the one who saves Gohan's life here. In a true reversal of the Saiyan arc, this time, it's Vegeta.
ここにいるのが貴様の最も恐れていたスーパーサイヤ人だ
It's difficult not to feel a degree of pity for Vegeta here. Off the back of a Zenkai boost, this newfound strength entirely convinces him he has become a Super Saiyan. As readers, we all know something so unceremonious would of course never be the real deal, not after literally dozens of chapters of build-up, and the concept is very quickly put to bed here. There's also an argument that Vegeta's assault on Frieza here feels too short in the manga, that simply 2 attacks doesn't quite cut it compared to the anime's 2 episodes. But I think it works in setting in the true terror of Frieza and setting up the genuinely heartbreaking moment that follows. Vegeta, with all of his strength, levies a blow at Frieza, only to be effortlessly dodged. What follows is an attack so fueled by frustration and rage that its power threatens the very planet itself. This is his everything, his final shot at exacting revenge for his people, and it fails. It breaks him. Reduced to tears, incapable of speech, Vegeta's resolve is demolished, and Toriyama invokes a very rare instance of mid-chapter narration. Terror struck the depths of Vegeta's soul for the first time in his life. For the first time, he felt despair. For the first time in his life, Vegeta shed tears. The great Vegeta had lost his will to fight. What a phenomenal piece of writing. There is such a dramatic shift in the way this segment is told, and fans of Togashi's Hunter x Hunter will be more than familiar with it. It pulls the audience right out of the midst of the world and forces them to take in the emotion of the event in a way that is completely disconnected from traditional manga storytelling. This sudden, momentary shift provides a sudden disembodied gravitas that just hits like an atomic bomb here. Frieza, the limitless evil and boundless dark cloud, has stolen not only Vegeta's family, not only his planet, but now something held truly close by the young prince's heart. He has stolen his will to fight. The legendary Super Saiyan feels like nothing more than a myth to him now. That like everything else in existence, it sits beneath the might of the terrible and terrifying Lord Freeza. Goku's arrival here may echo the very same scenario in the arc prior, but its tone could not be more different. There are no smiles and sensu beans, only uncertainty and abject terror. And as a thematic through line begins to build, Toriyama incorporates Toei's Bardock special into its manga, directly tying Goku's heritage into the annihilation of planet Vegeta itself. It's a great literary move, and one that helps shift the terror towards Frieza's direction instead, as he thinks back on that character. Goku dodges his attack effortlessly, and it reignites Vegeta's resolve, if only for a moment.
こいつこそ貴様が最も恐れていたスーパーサイヤ人だ
I love everything about this section so very much. This is genuinely Toriyama at his absolute peak. peak. This harrowing sequence works so wonderfully on two levels. For Vegeta, this is his Saiyan arc Piccolo moment, his transition to a legitimate ally. This tragic death speech tells the tale of a man subjugated for years. It appeals to Goku's kind-hearted nature, and it solidifies in Goku the need to accept and avenge his heritage. As Goku buries Vegeta, there's this wonderful moment of understanding between the two rivals. He asks for some of Vegeta's Saiyan pride. And as he turns to face Frieza with the weight of planet Namek and Vegeta on his shoulders, he says, but before we head into this phenomenal finale, we must first take a step back once again to look at the incredible staff who brought this arc to life. Last week I spent some time introducing the many studios that encompass Dragon Ball Z's production, outlining the key staff alongside their strengths and weaknesses. And as we now step forth into the Frieza arc, things are beginning to really ramp up with some of the most amazing episodes of the series and the promotion of some incredible staff. With the start of the Saiyan arc, a director by the name of Tatsuya Orime was promoted from an assistant director to a lead director role, and although he would still provide assistance on other directors' episodes within Z, in spite of this, the ones he led solo would soon begin to turn heads and become some of the most notable around. This was already true in the aftermath of the Saiyan arc, where its harrowing consequences were a background element in the manga, while Orime brought them to the forefront in one truly devastating episode.
あとはチャオズの死体じゃが。はてな。
ありませんよ。あいつ自爆してコッパみじんに。
Throughout some of the filler that follows, Orime would storyboard some great fights, but it's not until Namek proper that he truly showcases his skill. Episode 66 has one of the strongest storyboards of the show so far, packed with some awesome looking angles and some great creative lighting decisions for the more abstract moments. What's neat here is that this is actually a Studio Live episode who, if you remember from last week, is led by Yukio Ebizawa, and well, his art certainly isn't getting any better in this arc, and he does still produce an episode here that is genuinely one of the worst looking episodes in the entire 291 episode run. However, there is an awesome silver lining here. Back in episode 46, Studio Live gained a new staff member, Toshiyuki Kano. Although Tomoya Iida's work improved greatly in this era, it was Kano's talent that almost single-handedly elevated Studio Live's output, packing their episodes full of awesome drawings that definitely stand out when they hard cut to Ebizawa's questionable output. Studio Live wasn't the only studio to see changes, however. The undisputed GOATs at Seigasha shifted things around dramatically during this arc. While Takeuchi continued to supervise episodes through the initial portion of this material, his two all-star animators Shimanuki and Hisada were quickly becoming completely unstoppable, dropping the most insane work episode after episode, and well, Takeuchi's work, particularly his corrections, weren't looking so hot anymore. As a result, Takeuchi would step down from his position, falling back to a regular key animator, and in his place, Shimanuki and Hisada would begin to trade turns leading episodes. Shimanuki first took this position in episode 68 with a very obvious leap in quality, and with him came the debut of a very famous name these days, Naoki Tate. Prior to this, Tate had been an in-between artist at Seigasha, but with things shifting around, it was time his talents were made the best of, and so moving to key animator made a lot of sense. Hisada's supervision began much later in the arc with episode 98, and the run of episodes here is genuinely jaw-dropping and arguably some of the strongest animation output ever found in the series. Every episode Seigasha delivers in this arc just contains the most absurdly strong work, packed full of things like Shimanuki's impactful punches and Hisada's crazy dynamic movement. And what's more is, they're so often paired with incredible directors like Yoshihiro Ueda, who just douses scenes in his trademark pink color work. So everything just oozes with incredible atmosphere. It really is just the perfect storm of Dragon Ball Z's top talent at this point. And before we move on, let me just tell you all about the Seigasha head turn. These stylish guys have one of these awesome turns in almost all of their episodes, and it's one of the most defining aspects of their work. You will never be able to unsee it now that I pointed it out, by the way.
Mondo, cool!
Speaking of defining though, Shindo Productions sees an interesting shift in their episodes. I spoke last episode about how Mitsuo Shindo himself is a really strict supervisor, and while that definitely is still true, one of his underlings is very regularly standing out in spite of that. And that person is Tadayoshi Yamamoto. While his animation work here might not necessarily blow your minds through a modern lens as it looks like typical Dragon Ball action, this type of frenetic, heavily choreographed animation was really the first of its kind in the Z series. Yamamura was really defining how Dragon Ball should move, and that influence will carry forward across the entire show. Shindo himself clearly recognized this talent and allowed Yamamura to start assisting him with corrections throughout this arc. And that's a very important note to remember given what's to come in the next episode of this series. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Studio Junio likewise saw a major talent recognizing talent moment in this arc too. While Minoru Maeda is still very much the lead in the series, this arc saw him split between many duties, primarily the production of the Dragon Ball Z films. One man only has so much time, and so his two top underlings, Masaki Sato and Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru, were handed animation supervisory roles, with the latter even going as far as to lead the entire Bardock special with supervision and design work. Sato's episode comes early on and is a real powerhouse. I mean, this is arguably one of the best looking episodes in the entire series. Of course, Sato's art is amazing, but the actual movement here is so damn good too. Towards the start of this arc, an in-house toy animator by the name of Naoki Miyahara joined the fray and showcasing a very strong talent for action, and his work here is no exception. He's a name that will soon become more and more prominent as time goes on, so definitely keep him in mind. And alongside him, the usual suspects such as Takeo Ide and Hisashi Iguchi are here to carry even more on their backs. Joining Miyahara in ensuring this fight is one to remember, and if you think it's hard to tell these scenes apart, you wouldn't be wrong. Sato redrew almost all of the art to ensure it was of the absolute highest quality no matter what. This whole episode is honestly straight up stunning. Maeda does take back over towards the latter part of the arc, and while his work is okay, we've definitely hit a point where not only are his juniors completely surpassing his skills, but so are many of the other studio's talents. And as a result, you'll see that iconic moments like the Super Saiyan transformation come from Masaki Sato without any Maeda input. By the way, if you haven't seen that episode in a while, you might be shocked how jarring it is. Goku's all ragey Super Saiyan 1 minute, and then it haircuts to Bulma and the Frog. Awesome pacing decision, everyone. Well done. Now, on to the last studio. Last House. If you don't recall, Last House is led by Masayuki Uchiyama, who's kind of been a punching bag for fans for a very long time, and we'll get there, but his episodes are still largely serviceable in this arc. As I mentioned last episode, Naotoshi Shida and Taichiro Ohara are two key animators under him, and boy do they carry so hard in this arc. Shida seriously comes into his own here, really pulling out the old super fast, spinny, weeny awesomeness we all know and love. It's all so full of energy and really conveys the insane speed that had us all glued to our collective TV screens as kids growing up on this show. Ohara's kinda similar, except he's like, what if I drew the most insane looking effects and put all my heart and soul into animating Vegeta getting his ass kicked? And what's funny is that as lackluster as Uchiyama's art might feel in comparison to the surrounding staff, except Ebizawa, I do have to kind of give him props for reining in Ohara, who genuinely draws characters like an actual insane person, Caveman Goku Ooga Booga. Heck, he even improves a young Naotoshi Shida in some of the more complex angles. And okay, at this point you might be wondering, what happened to that solo animator you mentioned last episode? To answer your question, unfortunately, Aoshima ran away to work on some far less demanding shows. I mean, who can really blame him with how action-packed this series suddenly got? But of course, as you've no doubt gathered so far, the Freeza arc of this show saw huge developments across the board, to the point that losing a supervisor like this simply really didn't affect the production all that much. In fact, the series gained a name in the form of a director, one that will soon redefine Dragon Ball Z and go on to influence a generation of animators. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. And right now, we've got bigger things to deal with.
I am Lord Freeza. I am Emperor of the Universe. Die in disgrace at the hands of your master! Por Vegeta y por todos los que murieron.
¡Mi propio ferrocarril! ¡Yo soy el Super Saiyajin Goku! ¡Se morirá todo este planeta!
Goku versus Freeza. In the previous video, I touched on the philosophies that inform Goku and Vegeta's respective lives. And while I acknowledge on the surface that their approaches might share a lot in common, with regards to these two, the devil doesn't just stand before them, it's also very much in the details. Where someone like Vegeta could be mentally overwhelmed by the likes of Frieza's power alone, acting as confirmation that he will never be what he wants to be more than anything else, the strongest, for Goku, the mere presence of Frieza and the power he boasts only serves to fuel his enthusiasm in many respects, as all he wants to do is fight stronger opponents. And as is the case with Frieza, he's found his golden goose. Following the opening exchange between Goku and Frieza, King Kai says, "The Saiyans are interesting people, particularly Goku, I think. There seems to be no limit to his strength." Where the themes of the Saiyan saga focused on the differences that existed between the heroes of Earth and the invading Saiyan forces, with a specific focus placed on the virtues of teamwork, work ethic, and the bonds forged over one's life, the emphasis in this opening flurry explores less the themes I pointed out just now, but more so what each fighter represents in the greater context of the story in spite of their clear ideological differences. Frieza is an immovable object thought to be impossible to topple, and Goku an unstoppable force the likes of which isn't seeming to let up either anytime soon. Both seemingly limitless individuals squaring off to push themselves like no one else has before. The fashion by which Akira Toriyama explores this very difference between the two with regards to power is my favorite aspect of this story, and it all started here when Goku did this. This is a clever piece of creative strategy which leverages a clear area that Goku is superior over Frieza in. Much like Raditz, Nappa, and Vegeta in the prior arc, Frieza too is held back considerably by his lack of ability to sense the ki of his opponents. However, unlike Vegeta, who never learned it for egotistical reasons or lack of exposure to a particular skill set, Frieza never needed to, for he has never encountered in all of his life anyone who even remotely approaches a fraction of his base power. He said it himself earlier in this opening exchange, "I'm a bit surprised. I didn't think anyone in the universe surpassed Captain Ginyu," someone who we now know was 0.1% of the power Frieza's final form boasts. And so therefore, what I found fascinating about this plan of attack wasn't simply the reapplication of a successful approach taken in prior arcs, that being Goku using his ki sensitivity to gain the advantage in battle, but instead the subversion of a notion that an approach like that would do anything against someone as monstrous as Frieza. However, a lot of this, or perhaps all of it, goes unnoticed at first to us as viewers and readers, specifically because we know that both parties are holding back, almost to the point of just playing around. And while Goku may very well anticipate that from Frieza, the reverse is very much not true. Frieza has never met someone like Goku, someone who would even consider the notion of being able to, quote, hold back anything against the mighty Lord Freeza. Goku is very much a man who, when you fight him, you're picking a fight with every last one of his allies and masters that have passed what they have learned unto him. All of this achieves a sense of calm confidence in Goku that comfortably grants him safe passage across this warm-up. And at this point in the fight, while things are tense, as an audience, we know what Goku has in reserve. We think he might just have this. And then Frieza reveals an unsettling truth.
約 50%。つまりマックスパワーの半分も出せば、君を宇宙の塵にすることができるんだ。
何?
What was once a playful but competitive contest between what had been up until that point two demigods duking it out for supremacy has revealed to us a colossal discrepancy in strength, the likes of which looks insurmountable to overcome for Goku. However, we've seen him come back from worse odds. We've seen him topple the likes of the mightiest and most cruel tyrants in this universe almost single-handedly, and we aren't about to give up hope on the primary defender of the Earth and now Namek just yet. And Akira Toriyama knows this. I mentioned during my coverage of the Saiyan arc that something Akira Toriyama leveraged to drive home Goku's realization of his grandpa Gohan's fate was a literary technique called dramatic irony. In the case of Dragon Ball, unlike Goku, we knew how his grandpa came to die, but Goku never knew this. And that is what dramatic irony is, the audience knowing something a character doesn't. Such an approach empowers the reader to create expectations, and in the case of the previous arc, it allowed us to experience the somber reveal to Goku of the truth, that he was an unwitting beast that killed his own grandpa. This was, of course, a conscious decision made by Akira Toriyama to enhance the impact of the moment for us at home. For us not to be distracted by the revelation of the information itself, but to instead focus our attention on the reaction from Goku in the moment and the impact on him that revelation had. But for this fight with Frieza, Akira Toriyama flips the reader's knowledge and expectations against them, weaponizing that very foresight we have. Because we know how many things Goku has up his sleeve. We know he hasn't even begun to use the Kamehameha, the Taioken, the weighted clothing he might be wearing. And not to mention the Kaioken, which, as he said, allows him to literally 10x his power. We have seen time and time again that Goku is able to dip into these reserves, these tricks up his sleeve, and utilize them to overcome whatever stands in his way. Whether it be against Tenshinhan, Piccolo, Vegeta, or anyone else who has ever had the upper hand against him. We know Goku has something up his sleeve ready to turn the tides. This fight against Frieza is still in its opening act, and we haven't even begun to see what this new and improved Goku can do. In other words, Akira Toriyama has set our expectations, and that's when he writes one of the greatest mic drops in the series' history. Because Goku is already out of tricks. Unbeknownst to us, he has been using the Kaioken this entire time. There are no more weighted clothes to take off, no new abilities to reveal. He is already maxed out, and Frieza isn't even half trying. Ever since I was a little kid sitting on the couch, this has remained my favorite scene in the entire anime. For decades, this has sat atop above all else for me, and strangely, it's a scene that contains a considerable amount of creative liberty taken by those at Toei Animation and not Akira Toriyama. An aspect of the story many who haven't read the manga find difficult to understand or even reconcile. This short but empowering battle cry Goku echoes to himself before risking it all on a ×20 Kaioken that would surely ravage his entire body is the sort of never give up attitude in the name of his loved ones that I've grown to adore and take tremendous inspiration from. A vibe that persists in the original Japanese broadcast also. However, the manga and Akira Toriyama tell a very different story. In 1996, during an interview with Wired magazine, when asked about the poison that dwells within Goku's character, Akira Toriyama had this to say. Son Goku from Dragon Ball doesn't fight for the sake of others, but because he wants to fight against strong guys. So once Dragon Ball got animated, at any rate, I've always been dissatisfied with the righteous hero type portrayal they gave him. I guess I couldn't quite get them to grasp the elements of poison that slipped in and out of sight amongst the shadows. I think it's important to include here that I don't think Akira Toriyama is suggesting, when he says poison, that Goku is pure evil or never does anything selfless. As moments after this in the manga, when charging the Genki Dama, Goku goes on to say the following: "If I don't stop Frieza now, the whole universe will be in danger." And so while those elements are in his mind, I think what Toriyama is trying to get across here is that while Goku does value his family and friends, his desire to fight strong opponents and better himself is primary. This element to his character surfaced during the closing chapters of the Saiyan Saga, allowing Vegeta to escape. A choice that was likely going to bring about more horror and torment than what Goku would gain by enjoying a fight with him later. This is to say that while I adore the scene as it exists in the anime, the difference between the two is stark. In the anime, it is built up at length with Goku being drowned, followed by Goku rising up tremendously with fire in his heart as he risks his entire body and life on the final ×20 Kamehameha. A final act of desperation fueled by his determination to not only overcome the obstacle, but protect those he loves. But in the manga, it is just pure desperation. There is no inspiring speech, no dramatic build-up. Just Goku praying to himself that Frieza is bluffing and desperately staking it all on one big attack. And unfortunately, Frieza was in fact not bluffing. While the flurry did manage to hurt Frieza at least, all it did was manage to royally tick Frieza off. Not that it really matters, even with Goku sacrificing it all to levy 20 times his base power, it didn't budge Frieza even at half his strength. He knows he's outclassed beyond a chance. And so does Piccolo, who with a tortured smile on his face, says exactly what we're all thinking. It's a total loss. Like Kaio said, we shouldn't have tangled with Frieza no matter what.
なんだ何のつもりだ
Much the same way Goku was driven to desperation by the likes of Vegeta, he has once again begun to rely on the strength of those around him, channeling what is at this point his most powerful attack, the Genki Dama. And with it comes that very same tremendous amount of tension, totally zapped of energy, on the verge of collapse, his guard totally down, and the only line of defense between him and Frieza being his brazen attitude poking the tyrant. And while this is purely conjecture, I like to think that Frieza didn't pick up on the enormous Genki Dama right away because he's so used to never needing to check his blind spots, while the likes of Krillin, Gohan, and Piccolo locate the giant sphere of energy almost immediately. On the other hand, Frieza only manages to notice it when he's taunting and mocking Goku, noticing it through the reflection of the water behind him. It's a terrifying moment, and being totally drained, it's a discovery that all but seals Goku's fate. I love this story so damn much, I might get an aneurysm before I finish this video. Just like the arc prior, when his back is up against the wall and has no other options available to him, his allies all pool their energy together, and the one to risk his life isn't his son Gohan or his best friend Krillin. This time, it's his one-time enemy, Piccolo. Where the Genki Dama in the prior material possessed a thematic resonance with it being a physical manifestation of Goku's allies all working together to defy Vegeta, in this it has an additional dimension of the surrounding planets lending their energy for the conflict. With this one technique, Goku acts as the vessel, offering a chance for all living things he can reach to defend themselves against this tyrant of the universe, Frieza, to prevent Namek and our heroes from suffering that same fate. There's an aspect to this attack that I've never touched on before, and it's in the way Frieza is hit by it and the way that he reacts to it. Firstly, he's caught off guard. As Goku said in the opening to this fight, Frieza is overconfident, which leaves him open to attack. And it did. Not once, not twice, but a third and powerful time in this sequence also. And in the manga, the sort of character he is shines through perfectly in his reaction to the Genki Dama itself in 3 stages. At first, he exclaims, "This is nothing!" He says this almost reflexively. This is the response he's used to giving towards everything. A battle cry that exists to strike fear into the hearts of those who dare defy him, who laughably think any attack they could ever levy against the Emperor of the Universe would do anything. However, once contact is made, he reiterates this to himself. This is nothing, almost as if to reassure it to himself. And one last time, he tries to say it again, before a very clear fear falls across his face for the very first time in this entire series. For the very first time, perhaps in his entire life, Frieza feels the cold and lonely embrace of death. A fate befitting someone as cruel as he, and one bestowed upon him by the longtime great, ever tenacious and never alone, Son Goku. Once again, despite the road to get there, despite the obstacles or the challenges he faced, Goku has always managed to defy the odds with a smile and with the help of his friends. What happens when every advantage you thought you had fails you? What's left when clever strategy doesn't work? When the martial arts you've honed for your entire life isn't enough? When the techniques you've been able to rely on fail over and over and over again? What happens when your friends who've been there with you since day one not only cannot help you, cannot save you, but they can't even save themselves? What's left at that point? In the Saiyan Saga, I spoke at length concerning the differences and virtues of Goku and the people of Earth. How believing in your fellow man and relying on what your allies have offered you on top of all of your hard work, how all of that can, when faced with certain doom, become your salvation. There's a powerful message in the core of that arc that I have carried with me to this very day, and as I said in this video already, this arc stretches those ideas and themes past their natural limits until they break. This Goku feels different. And what's more is, this fight suddenly feels entirely different too. The way Goku barked at Gohan, almost as if he were holding himself back, like he was balancing on a razor's edge, it created for me an atmosphere that felt totally distinct surrounding Goku than that which I'd ever seen before. And to drive this fact home, there's a moment that harkens back to the Saiyan Saga involving Gohan. During the last arc, after being sent away by Goku before his fight against Vegeta, Gohan turns back at the first sign of irregularity. And his instincts were correct. This time, something similar takes place. A flicker of explosive energy blasts ignite the sky behind him. Trouble is taking place, but the difference here isn't that Gohan isn't being brave, but that he instead is certain his father will be okay. There's no doubt. A certainty and confidence in his father that will continue to permeate not only through to the end of this arc, but long into the next and beyond, for better or for worse. At this present moment, Goku has done it. He's pushed past his limits into that of legend and myth. A once trembling body riddled with fatigue and uncertainty has been replaced with ice-cold confidence and seemingly limitless potential. Eyes, once fluttering on the verge of losing consciousness, have transformed into spears piercing the very heart of the usurper standing before him. And the voice which once muttered that he couldn't win now erupts with a triumphant roar. Super Saiyajin Son Goku da! A massive component of what makes Super Saiyan both special to me as well as so deeply impactful to the story and those who read it is the contrast it establishes between itself and other abilities or transformations that came before. Visually, it was striking in its simplicity, but thematically, it was born amid circumstances unlike anything the likes of which we've seen in the past. Abilities and techniques Goku could rely on back then, born from his rearing or the teachings of wise masters, were in their first use almost a celebration of something Goku went through. In order to wield the explosive power of the Kaioken, the life Goku had led allowed him to travel to other worlds in his own body. Thanks to his tenacity and physical prowess, he was able to traverse Snake Way, and thanks to his openness and eagerness to learn, he was able to bond with King Kai, a friendship that proved to be invaluable later and indeed one that helped him learn the Kaioken. A move that exists because of positive attributes Goku possesses and the willingness of others to help him. Super Saiyan isn't that. For For me, what sets Super Saiyan apart from everything else at this point in the story is that it's a power exposed through profound sadness, as if it were the pain of loss and retribution personified. Where each and every ability our heroes have utilized up until now are born from their undying will to improve themselves and the pursuit of greater strengths as a result, Super Saiyan stands alone against all of them. Not a transformation born from effort, but a result of immense pressure reaching a tipping point. Like a worn dam bursting or an abused animal trapped in a corner. It is the direct result and retribution of what evil has been wrought against Goku and the peaceful planet Namek. A rebirth amid intense trauma, like channeling the power of the sun, if only for a moment, an instant change that allowed the user to walk a dangerous line and wield a necessary strength to vanquish a terrible evil. And no matter who you are, whether you're an adult from the East or a little kid from the West like I was, there's something unbelievably cathartic about that. A feeling that establishes one of the most iconic and easily recognizable moments in all of Japanese pop culture. This is an important moment in the story for sure, but I never realized how perfectly it establishes that the Super Saiyan that stands before Frieza is still Goku at the end of the day. In the same way Raditz never anticipated Goku to hold him for the Makanko Sappo, or the same way Nappa never thought he'd have to keep his guard up against someone like Chaozu in that way. When Frieza was charging his blast, Goku didn't realize until the last second that that blast's intended target wasn't him. In the end, it's a strategic play that's equal parts ingenious as it is horrifically despicable. For the first time since donning this new form, Goku's stoic expression cracks as the planet Namek beneath him does the same, consumed by the blast. It seems Frieza was destined to win this war. Consumed by fear, he too was backed into a corner and forced to pull a trigger he always had every intention of using as a contingency. The revelation of Kami in this scene is a wonderfully fun way of proving that all is not as it seems on planet Namek. That Frieza miscalculated and that Goku still has a chance to take out Frieza. And what's more, the plan King Kai comes up with concerning the remaining Dragon Balls, using the Earth's wish to bring back the Namekians, and by doing so, bringing back Guru, which in turn brings back the dragon which still has a single wish to grant on Namek. Everything is working out, and that's when the winds change once again. For just like Akira Toriyama warned us, there's always that element of poison that slips in and out amongst the shadows of Goku's character. A poison that rears its head once Frieza reveals that he's not even fighting at 100% yet. A fate that could easily be avoided. Goku could easily, comfortably take Frieza out right here and now, this second, with a well-placed and powerful Kamehameha, a technique that has saved him and his friends on more than one occasion. He could rely on his friends then to make the wish for him on the Namekian Dragon Balls, travel back home with all of his loved ones safely, abandoning Frieza on the floating bomb of his own creation in the middle of space. But that poison, that urge to satisfy that burning question, to test himself, to see what Frieza is hiding, to avenge his friend, that burning dark desire in Goku is more alluring than any other option to him, and he doesn't regret it. Towards the beginning of this video, I took note of an event on Namek referred to as the Cataclysm, a climate-induced event that ravaged their planet, almost wiping out their entire Namekian race. Much like the Dragon Balls on Earth, which were limited by the power of their own creator, the Namekian Dragon Balls couldn't prevent the disaster that was to take place on theirs. And looking at it now, perhaps this was intentional, perhaps it wasn't, but in reading through this material right now, as the awakened warrior of Saiyan legend clashes with the tyrannical personification of evil in the universe, I can't help but see some parallels to Namek's tortured past here. That this event, which has scarred Namek irreparably, that has resulted in the near erasure of an entire race of people, similarly to the events of the past which took Namek to the very brink, this was a battle that was always destined to take place and couldn't be avoided. Warned against fighting Frieza, Goku gets excited. As he draws closer to this creature, his desire to contend with him only grows until He sheds any and all worldly pretense and embraces this clash with Frieza as the planet-destroying event it ultimately becomes. Objecting to the wish King Kai wanted to have granted, not wanting to be wished back to Earth, thus leaving the fight early, but instead ensuring that he sees it through to the bitter end, no matter what. From the moment we meet Frieza, he strikes fear into the hearts of all who oppose him. He slithers through this arc with a singular focus and expects everyone to bow in subjugation, in awe of his abilities. Goku, similarly, once he arrives, is presented as this unstoppable demigod, the likes of which the Ginyus, Vegeta, and even his own friends and family can hardly believe. Both of these characters, similarly to the Cataclysm itself, which once upon a time destroyed Namek and its people, represent a similarly unstoppable force of nature. Neither Goku in his determination to fight the absolute best or to allow Frieza reach 100% in the first place, nor Frieza driven to madness in an effort to re-establish his own dominance, a being willing to take whatever measure he needs to in order to eviscerate the scum that dare defy him. Neither are going to stop until one side wins, until one side is satisfied, until one side quits. This scene is special to me. Within this bright and magical, almost dreamlike story that helps us forget the torments of the world and all of its ailments, it's indeed these dark and intensely conflicted chapters that are the portion of this story I return to most often. And I think it's because it reminds me of something important, something I wish wasn't true. I've made it clear over the years that Goku is one of my favorite characters of all time, and my absolute favorite in this story by a considerable margin. While I have tremendous time for the likes of Piccolo, Gohan, Vegeta, and many others as this series has demonstrated, there's something important about Goku's character to me that has remained a consistent part of me since I was a child. And that is his ability to expect the best from everyone and everything if he can help it. I've spoken about how I adored his conviction against Raditz, willing to sacrifice himself in the name of the greater good, but prior to that, there's a moment where he had his brother begging for his life. He was in a position where he could rest assured that at the very least, he, Goku, would be safe, but he released it anyway. I'm not under any illusion that Goku is some deep thinker when it comes to morality here, but there's something so infectious about how simple his actions are and how at times those simple actions can be profound, exposing how we all overcomplicate our lives sometimes. I've spoken about how when he was faced with absurd challenges, he's never shied away from them, but instead looked on with almost witless optimism, an attitude that echoes the philosophy of he who thinks he can and he who thinks he can't are both usually correct. A philosophy I've tried to apply to my own life, tough as it can be to do so at times. And throughout even this material, Goku has demonstrated time and again he doesn't believe in killing people for the strategic sake of it. That despite his deep yearning to fight, he knows where to draw the line. He, after having grown up with wonderful people, understands the value of life. But Frieza doesn't. In a world where, as I get older, I feel increasingly more jaded to the atrocities of man and the hopelessness of it all, I try on occasion, sappy as it may be, to return to these stories from my childhood because there's a gentle comfort to them. When we're children, the world is full of possibilities. We can become anything, and we, naive as it might seem, think we can bend the world in the right direction. That despite the evils it may contain or the corruption that lurks in the shadows, the stories we've grown up with have instilled within us this idea that if we try hard enough, we can break past that which has limited every generation before. And perhaps part of that is true. Perhaps believing we can and approaching something with optimism is the way forward. In this arc, Goku has broken each and every one of his limits over and over again, almost losing himself entirely to the anger and lust for combat that's appeared in his character since the beginning of the story. But something did surprise me here. In the beginning of the last arc, Goku, after hearing his brother's plea, released his tail because he believed him. He believed that his brother was being honest, that he could change. However, when Goku spared Vegeta's life and showed him mercy, he did so for clearly selfish reasons. And on Goku's adventure traveling to the battle against the almighty Frieza, he encountered numerous reasons to turn back, but never did. For again, his own self-interest. However, despite becoming the Super Saiyan and despite this trend of self-interest, this show of mercy to Frieza in this scene never appeared as anything other than genuine to me. Like the Goku that fought and showed mercy to Raditz was still in there somewhere. After Frieza's pathetic plea for help, Goku's eruption of anger all but confirmed he wanted nothing more than to be able to fly away and leave him to die in the dirt, thinking about what took place before his inevitable death. But he didn't. When we're children, we carry these naive dreams with us until one day you wake up and you're an adult. And the black and white world you thought you knew is in fact revealed to be coated in terrifyingly subtle shades of grey. And for me, this scene, despite contending with one of the most evil characters put to paper, reminded me that sometimes the righteous path, the path of respect and avoidance of death, sometimes, no matter how much you might wish it wasn't so, is unavoidable. That even for the likes of Goku, someone who's overcome everything prior, who through his conviction at heart has carved out a place for himself in history as a god of sorts, through the likes of him, I'm reminded that no matter how far you think you've come, no matter how strong you think you are, how much you've learned or the distance you've traveled, you can still stay true to who you are, but that doesn't mean it'll work. Because sometimes there are those that words alone cannot reach, who in that moment refuse to see the value in life that you see, who no matter how unreasonably kind you've been, there are those who are so far gone into their own delusions of supremacy, fear, and greed that they can't change. When I was a kid, I used to think that this scene was awesome. I used to think that Goku didn't compromise who he was deep down to satisfy a base desire, and I relished in the likes of Frieza, like many other great villains I watched at the time, be the one to place the proverbial noose around his own neck. Frieza, the Emperor of the Universe, who always referred to Saiyans as unsophisticated, primitive, brutish apes, in the end was the one who acted like a mindless beast when all the chips were down. And while all of that is worthy of praise as a feat of tremendous dramatic writing in and of itself, as a young adult back in the day, this scene acted as my first sobering reminder that sometimes, while indulging in a selfish desire can leave you trapped, more than that, kindness too can be hopeless. In conclusion, this video was even more difficult to write than my last. It appears my feelings concerning this series only gets more complicated as time moves on, but I hope that didn't diminish your enjoyment of this breakdown. Sincerely, the Freeza Saga, for both personal reasons as well as its own completely standalone merits, holds a lot of emotional weight for me. It's the culmination of all that was established in the arc prior and pays it off in some of the most astounding ways I've ever seen. It's a work of art, and while I've completed this video, I know I'll look back on this piece I've written with frustration for not expanding on another aspect of this tale that mattered to me greatly. But I suppose that's what great art does. Allow you to see different things in it over time. And unfortunately, because I've thrown myself so deeply into this material, the Cell Saga is going to take a little longer to cover than I thought. And because I want to do it right, I'm going to have to delay it for 1 week, meaning you can anticipate that video on August 12th. But if you don't want to wait that long, you can always sign up to our Patreon, where it will be posted as soon as it's finished, as well as some sneak previews and all sorts of other related perks. Either way, I hope to see you there. For while the Earthlings have managed to wish their friends back thanks to the courageous actions of Son Gohan, Krillin, and the complicated Son Goku, a long and eye-opening path still lies before them. One wrought with death-defying battles and a coming of age that captured the hearts and minds of millions across the world. But as always, I've been Mark Fitzpatrick. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you there.